Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from here in the podcasting studio at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I would like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt or Kosapsum. And also, Island Savings is a part of all this because they make it possible for us to do these chamber chats. Island Savings is a division of First West Credit Union, and they are redefining what banking can do for people, for communities, and for the world. A little secret here, the day that we're recording this is not today when you're watching it. This is happening August 21st in the afternoon. So we are less than 12 hours away from the possibility of a rail strike happening across North America. And the reason I bring that into this conversation is that one of the things that we learned in the pandemic, and then subsequently after that in the atmospheric river that we had, is how fragile our supply system is. And on top of that, we're on an island. So for that reason, we're also quite susceptible. Food security and food sustainability is a big issue around here. That's why we want to talk with an organization today called CR Fair, which is the Capital Region Food and Agriculture Initiative Roundtable. The organization is led by Linda Geggie, who's the executive director. Linda, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Bruce. Nice to hear from you and see you today.
And you too. And also with us today is Laura Gair, who is the director of food security and resource development at CR Fair. Laura, how are you today?
Doing well, Bruce. Thanks for having us today.
Okay, Linda, let's go back to you, and I'll ask you a question I very often ask of people on Chamber Chat. So somebody says to you, oh, CR Fair, what's that? What do you do? What's your answer?
Yeah, well, it gets easier actually to answer that question now because people are so much more aware of how food is such an integral part of our lives, both related to our health, the economy, and the environment. So when people ask me who is CR Fair, I say we're an organization, a community-based organization working to promote healthy, sustainable, just food systems. And we do that in a role of a coordinating body. So we bring a vast network together called the Good Food Network to work together through what we call a collective impact model, where we have these wicked problems. So around food and health, food and climate change, obviously, and also the viability of our local food system. And we work together to solve these challenges that are before us.
Tell me about the creation of the organization and how you grew it. Did you see what I did there? How you grew it? But how did the organization grow from its beginning?
Well, it sprouted, and I'll keep going with that. Around the late 90s, 1997, there was a number of groups and organizations that began to talk together around food and how it was a challenge. And that was particularly many faith-based organizations who were focused on people who didn't have enough food. They were facing food insecurity in their families. We were also coming together, understanding was post-Rio and the real interest in sustainability and looking at food systems. And so a lot of the farm community interested in sustainable food and food production. And then, of course, the health sector, thinking about, we're just seeing continuing chronic health, the rise in chronic health, particularly diabetes, hypertension, and realizing that at the center of these conversations is food. And so we developed a roundtable where we would come together and learn more about these different pieces of the system, how they were interconnected, and how if we wanted to look at advancing health and community well-being or economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, together we could address these things that not one of us could be working on individually. So that was the seeds, as you will, of CR Fair as a roundtable. And we've actually continued over the multiple decades that we've been around to convene as a roundtable. So working together with multi-sectors. This includes local governments, university and education sectors. We work with many of the school districts, as well as the business community. Obviously, we're a part of the chamber. We're really happy with our new chamber membership, and just bringing diverse folks together to be able to work on these issues together.
Yeah, you mentioned the Good Food Network. I want to come back to that in just a second. But
Mhm.
Laura, explain to me what's food literacy. Laura, what does that mean?
Yeah, food literacy. When you think literacy, you think of knowing and understanding with languages. But when it talks about food literacy, we're talking about knowing how to access food, food that's affordable, food that is dietary appropriate, and follows your dietary preferences and your cultural needs and preferences as well. Things that are environmentally sustainable, knowing what that means and where your food comes from, knowing how to cook food and preserve food for yourself and your family, and knowing how to grow your own food. Growing food brings a lot of power to be able to have food that you want and that you're creating in your own space, whether it's a kitchen garden or a small windowsill with some herbs growing on it. Enabling people to be able to grow and access food. That's food literacy.
I mean, the relationship that many people have with food is they go to a store and buy it, and they don't really think much past that. But I'm a bit of a food nerd in a way, in that I read labels of everything that I buy to see what's in it. Is that a part of literacy, Laura?
Absolutely, being able to understand what is healthy food by reading a nutrition label, and also understanding what is healthy for you and that it's appropriate for you and that it fits into your worldview. That's all part of it.
All the conversations that we have at the chamber and so many other organizations about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. A lot of what's happened, Linda, of course, happened in this region post colonization, but pre colonization, it was all very sustainable because the Indigenous peoples didn't have the problems we have today. How did that all change when settlers got here?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think we always want to honor the original stewards of the food system here. I know I have a lot of conversations with elders, and there's this wonderful saying that when the tide is out, the table was set. So just really understanding that this is such bountiful land and waters, and those original indigenous folks that were here and continue today see themselves in relation with these lands and waters, and as not only as stewards but in relationship. And when settlers came, there was a disruption to those food systems, particularly with lack of access and loss of management and rights to those lands. And so we saw settlers come from originally European descent, although we have histories of Polynesians, early settlers of Polynesians, and other places around the globe, and they brought their foods and they brought their methods with them to these lands. And actually, the island and the Gulf Islands became of in the early days a very important food producing sector for an area for all of the new settler populations that were arising. So these kinds of forms of agriculture were not from these lands and places, and so therefore have a lot of disruptive kinds of outcomes on those ecosystems. And so with the settlers also came large populations, and so much more pressure on the lands and waters, and we're continuing to see that today.
Yeah, we really are. There's a whole
Yeah.
bunch of stuff about that on the website as well. It's crfair.ca, crfair.ca. Okay, do you have a good food network? We're going to talk about that next. Our guests today on Chamber Chats are with an organization called CR Fair, Capital Region Food and Agriculture Initiative Roundtable. The executive director is Linda Geggie. So, Linda, let's loop back on that. Tell me about the Good Food Network.
Yeah, well, the Good Food Network emerged over the 1990s, early 2000s. I'd say by about 2010, we started to realize the vast amount of people's interest in food, and also the ways that they were organizing around food. Everything, as I mentioned earlier, from churches, but also to community organizations. We saw the growth of life cycles in the 1990s as a urban agriculture and youth-based initiative, the Compost Education Center. Um, Obviously, there's quite a bit of organizing in the farm communities with um, the organic producers were learning and growing their sector. And so, as we started to tackle some of these initiatives, around things like healthy school food or equitable access to food. We would be in communication with these groups and organizations, and we started to see the value of working together. And so the network started to grow. And so now we have over 100 organizations in the Good Food Network, and about, oh, over 2,000 individuals who also support good food. And what that means to us is food that is good for the planet, good for the providers, so those that who are, you know, growing and processing and gathering our foods and selling our foods, cooking our foods, as well as good for the health and well-being of all. So this network continues to work together and grow, and we're really excited about some of the achievements that the network has had over the last 10 years. And I want to say it's really incredible to me, because I've been along for the ride for a number of decades now, to see that anything that we've been able to achieve took at least a decade of work together. So building relationships, understanding each other, building trust to work together, being able to mobilize the resources. So I can give you a couple of examples of the things that we've done that I'm really proud of. And one of them was we started a food rescue. So it was a food access and distribution working group. So there's many agencies that provide food to people in emergency food situations or through food programs. And all of these groups were reliant on volunteers, and many were spending a lot of time and energy on finding food resources to be able to put into their food programs and their food hampers and their distribution. And so we got together as a working group in the roundtable structure to talk about how could we work together. So over the years, the Victoria Foundation was very instrumental in this, working alongside us and Van City and many of the grocers and retailers to come together with the food rescue and recovery program, which resulted in the purchase of a warehouse and working with the mustard seed and what became the Food Share Network. So all of those organizations that are distributing food, that are now over about 70 organizations in the region. And what happens is grocers come and drop all of their near dated and still good and edible foods off to the warehouse. It gets sorted and then goes out to these 70 organizations throughout the community that are helping people. And so I know that this year alone, $9 million worth of food was rescued and redistributed out to the community to try and meet this, well, first of all, through the pandemic, but then through this continual affordability crunch for families. So what became as a conversation of how do we solve the problem of getting more food out to folks in need became a system that was set up and works with all of many grocers and farmers who glean and drop their foods off at the warehouse and gets out to all of these people in need in our community.
And that is it. Viewfield is the road where that is, right?
Yes, that's
in
right.
Esquimalt. So if you know where the Flying Squirrel is, that facility, it's the building next door to that on Viewfield. So that's where that all happens. I've been to fundraising events and things there. It's
Yeah,
a remarkable facility. Laura, I want to talk to you about the South Island Farm Hub and the Kitchen Connect processing facility. Tell me more about that, if you would.
Yeah, thanks. The facility at Viewfield is home to the South Island Farm Hub and Kitchen Connect, as well as this food redistribution program that the Mustard Seed runs. And so, the Farm Hub and Kitchen Connect are programs of the Victoria Community Food Hub Society, which is our CR Fair's sister charity. And so we oversee those programs. And the Farm Hub is at the warehouse there, aggregating and delivering locally grown, fished, and made foods to people's homes and to charities and school programs as well. And we subsidize the purchases of charities and school programs of that food so that they can get that wonderful local food as well at half the cost or more, so that it increases affordability for the people in our community who wouldn't otherwise be able to access it.
Yeah, when we had the disruption of the pandemic, and as we said before, the atmospheric river, a lot of people realized that we don't have capacity here to produce everything that we consume. So that's where an opportunity exists. Of course, another factor in all of this is climate change. We're going to talk about that next. We're talking food today on Chamber Chats with Linda Geggie and Laura Gair, who are with CR Fair, the Capital Region Food and Agriculture Initiative Roundtable. So, Linda, we talked about pre colonization and post colonization here. We're living in a completely different climate now than was here 200 years ago. Tell me about that and what its impact is on the food system.
Well, we've been talking to a lot of the farmers to hear um, how they're seeing these changing climate conditions for growing have been for them. And we actually held a farmer to farmer gathering a number of years ago with the focus on climate change because we wanted to see what strategies, what people were first of all noticing, and what were the strategies that they were taking. And what we learned was that it's not necessarily we think about things getting warmer, it's more the weather weirding. So having, yes, hotter, drier summers and colder, wetter winters, but also just unpredictability. And so having droughts, having floods, having cold snaps, people might have noticed that this winter there was a really there was a period of extreme cold, and we're seeing the impacts of that on the Okanagan fruit growers, for example, who I was talking to some farmers. They said they have no cherries this year. So what we're learning from the farmers is that their best course of action is really by talking to each other and gaining more knowledge around what are the things that they are finding are supporting their ability to create a better predictable growing environment. So they're using more greenhouse growing, putting in better drainage and irrigation infrastructure, using varietals that are more drought resistant, for example, or can uh, produce fruit within a shorter growing season. So there's all of these different strategies that they were actually already starting to put in place. But what they understood is that by talking to each other, and by also there's been supports with the regional agrologists and the Ministry of Agriculture to be able to support these growers to deal with things like drought and deluges sometimes of rain. The other thing is really trying to also consider wildfire and how smoke haze and actually fires themselves could have impact, and being prepared for those kinds of disruptions as well.
Yeah, you talk about the cherries. I was getting a haircut yesterday, and the woman who cuts my hair was saying that her wife came home from the grocery store holding the bill, saying, "I don't know why everything suddenly costs so much more." And she looked at it and said, "Well, you paid $17 for a box of cherries. That's why." That's what's going on. So, Laura, I want to go back to you now and talk sort of relative to that too. The way that we manage waste in our culture also creates a huge issue with change in climate. And you talked about the hub on Viewfield Road where you take care of what could potentially become food waste. Talk about that in a bigger picture, and what can we all learn about that?
Yeah, so a lot of food waste, we think about food waste as what we're throwing out at home and what we could be using. And if you have leftovers in your fridge and they're getting thrown away, and food waste on that level. But a lot of food waste actually happens higher up in the supply chain, where it's waste from grocers or waste from farms themselves. And so the food redistribution program helps with getting the food from the grocers and getting that out to community. Our South Island Farm Hub program looks at the farms themselves and how we can support farms so that their food isn't going to waste. Because not only then is the food getting thrown away, perfectly good food, but the farmer put all that cost and time and effort into making this beautiful produce, and then no one gets to enjoy it. And so we want to support farmers to have the revenue that they need to keep growing the good food that they're growing. And we are addressing food waste at the same time by saying, okay, we can take this whole area of your field. We're going to sell it out through the South Island Farm Hub. It can go to charities, it can go to school programs, it can feed a whole lot of people, and the farmers get the revenue that they need to keep going. And with our new processing facility, we can also take that seasonal abundance and process it into something that has a longer shelf life, that's shelf stable. And so that allows it to extend throughout the year so the food isn't getting wasted sitting in the field.
We've been talking a lot about food that's grown, but Linda, we also consume protein. So, dairy and meat and poultry and seafood. Tell me about what CR Fair does with that sector.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important for people to understand that there's been a steady decline of livestock producers on the island, and there's a sort of a cascading effect of as producers, or some of our chicken producers, for example, started to go out of business, that all of the support services around those agricultural producers also, that like the large bovine vets and fencing supplies to tractors, they start to also feel the depression in their sort of their revenues. And so it's got this cascading effect, so that we start to see that the viability of these types of producers is limited. However, we also know that people are really supportive. There's almost like an underground meat economy that happens on Vancouver Island now, because people are so they really want well cared for, healthy animals that they feel good about purchasing and eating. And so we see the emergence now of specialty butchers, and a lot of these butchers are seeing rising demand. And then at the same time, people are also becoming very aware of the climate impacts of eating proteins and finding new sources of protein. So it's quite a complex environment when it comes to talking about meat and dairy. And then you can also um, look at some of the ways that government interventions over the years have tried to stabilize those industries through their quota programs, and how that's also both a support, but also a cause of challenges for people who are trying to get in to growing, or having eggs, or any of the supply managed products. So it's quite a complex environment, but we do know that the infrastructure for producing livestock is pretty limited, and we know we've done some studies working with some of the municipalities on the viability of the sector, and knowing that abattoirs are an area where we just don't have processing facilities nearby that are accessible or affordable. People have to ship to the mainland or up island. So these are some of the things that we continue to work with our partners on, looking at different options for that.
Yeah, and that whole thing about the slaughterhouse or an abattoir, you're taking an animal, transporting it onto a truck, onto a ferry, into another place. All of that's traumatic, and then it just gets worse for the animal. So that's another reason why we have
Yes.
to take a look at that. We have so much more to talk about, but we're going to have to do it another time. This is a remarkable organization doing very transformative things to help us better understand the food that we eat, and how we can be a bigger part of making sure that we do that in a sustainable way. But thank you both for being here. The website again is crfair, crfair.ca. Linda Geggie is the executive director. Linda, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And Laura Gair, the Director of Food Security and Resource Development at CR Fair. Laura, thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much, Bruce.
And I am Bruce. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.